Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you are watching this. What you're watching is What's Left with your host, Larry Erickson. That's me, obviously. And for about the next half hour, I'm going to be rattling on about some things that I hope you will find interesting and hope you'll stick with us for that time. If you have any questions, comments, or reactions, whatever to the show, you always can send them to me directly. This is my personal email here, whoviating@aol.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website. It's called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. The URL will be here a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there if you'd like to still send an email if you didn't write it down, didn't run out and grab a pencil and write it down. Or you can leave a comment there at the website if you'd rather do that. The one thing is that if you do send me email, as always, two requests. One, include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam. And two, be a little patient about getting an answer. All right, with that, let's get to it. I'm going to start, as I always like to, whenever I can, with some good news. The Rump, our president, the Rump, keeps trying to ban Muslims from the country. And he keeps losing. His first attempt at a travel ban was a complete whiff, and the second attempt is faring no better. Now, just as a reminder, so that we can all be sure that we're talking about the same thing, the second travel ban order, which was issued on March 6th, was supposedly designed to remedy the legal issues with the first one. Well, the second order put a 90-day ban on nationals from 6 majority Muslim countries entering the U.S., those 6 countries being Libya, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. It put a 120-day freeze on any refugee entering the U.S., and it also reduced the cap on the number of refugees who could be admitted to the U.S. from 110,000 to 50,000 for fiscal 2017. All right, but it hasn't gone off so well for the Rump. First, on March 15th, Federal District Court Judge Derek Watson in Hawaii issued a nationwide injunction against the ban. The next day, on March 16th, District Judge Theodore Chuang in Maryland issued his own injunction, where he found that the proposal was, quote, the realization of the long-envisioned Muslim ban, and noted that during the 2016 presidential campaign, the Rump himself had called for, quote, a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. On May 25th, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, based in Richmond, Virginia, upheld Judge Twang's order, finding that the ban, quote, drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination aimed at Muslims. And now, on June 11th, a panel of the San Francisco-based Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld Judge Watson's order, in a ruling that included a reference to the Rump's tweets, calling the ban exactly what it is, despite his lawyer's insistence that it isn't, a travel ban. Now, interestingly, the Ninth Circuit ruled on narrow grounds and did not address the question of if the ban is unconstitutional discrimination against Muslims. Instead, they said his high orangeness had actually violated federal immigration law. Under that law, under the immigration law, the administration was required to make a finding that entry of the people in question would be detrimental to the United States, and the administration had failed to do so, according to the court. In fact, quoting the court, the order does not offer a sufficient justification to suspend the entry of more than 180 million people on the basis of nationality. Now, ruling on narrow grounds is not surprising. Courts often prefer to rule on narrow grounds if they're available than having to deal with broader and more complex questions. But then again, it's possible that the Ninth Circuit chose this path deliberately for a different reason. The case will likely wind up in the lap of the Supreme Court, and Stephen Vladeck, he's a professor at the University of Texas School of Law, he said the Ninth Circuit actually provided an easier path for the Supreme Court to uphold the injunctions against the ban, because that decision avoided entirely the controversy over the Rump's campaign statements and whether or not this actually is religious discrimination. So, thus far, the Rump is a whiff in Game 1 and 0 for 4 in Game 2. Let's hope he keeps his string going and we can have some more good news. All right, speaking of good news, here's some I did not expect this good news. On June 14th, Judge James Boasberg of the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C., ruled that the federal permits authorizing the Dakota Access Pipeline to cross the Missouri River just upstream of the Standing Rock Reservation, permits hastily issued by the Trump administration just days after the inauguration, violated federal law in several important aspects. The court found that the Army Corps of Engineers, quote, did not adequately consider the impacts of an oil spill on fishing rights, hunting rights, or environmental justice, or the degree to which the pipeline's effects are likely to be highly controversial. Now, the court ruled against the Standing Rock Sioux on several other issues, finding that the decision to allow the pipeline was okay under the law in some ways. And unfortunately, it did not require the pipeline to be shut off pending the outcome of the case, leaving that to additional briefings and a status conference next week. Be that as it may, and even if the order is not as sweeping as we might like, this is still an excellent victory in a case and on an issue that was thought to have been lost. And that is certainly good news. All right, next up, we have one of our occasional features. This is called Everything You Need to Know. That's where you can learn an awful lot about something in a very short time. In this case, it's everything you need to know about what's wrong with the right-wing view of foreign policy and the U.S. role in the world in just one sentence. In response to the terrorist attack in London, England on June 3rd, Pat Buchanan, former vice presidential speechwriter and the nutcase's nutcase until he was usurped by Alex Jones, declared that, and I'm quoting, "Today we are in the 16th year of a war begun on 9/11. Right, it all started on 9/11. Nothing that happened before that matters. Nothing that the U.S. did or didn't do before that is relevant. No policy we pursued, no dictator we supported, no oppression we endorsed through arms sales, no economic exploitation that we profited by, no offense we committed had anything to do with this. It all just came out of nowhere, unprovoked, unpredicted, unjustified on 9/11. That's what the right wing thinks. And that is everything you need to know. All right, we've got an update on something here. It's going to take me a little bit of time. So last week, I reported on the not good news that the reactionaries in Congress want to make Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, a permanent part of law. As of now, that section's supposed to expire the end of the year. I also noted how Section 702 is the part of FISA that, quoting myself, allows the NSA to sink its hooks directly into the infrastructure of ISPs and just suck up all the internet traffic passing through that point, which of course means including all the content of all that internet traffic. And I mentioned the threat to privacy that represents. Well, I wanted to update that because I decided I didn't go explain enough about the dangers involved in Section 702. So I want to spend a couple of minutes doing that. The first thing to know is that under Section 702, the targets of NSA spying are supposed to be limited to non-U.S. persons outside the United States. But those targets do not have to be terrorists. They do not have to be criminals. They do not, in fact, have to be suspected of any wrongdoing whatsoever. According to Sarah St. Vincent, a researcher at Human Rights Watch, quoting her, as long as a significant purpose of the surveillance is to obtain foreign intelligence information, a term FISA defines broadly, any non-U.S. person outside the country's borders is fair game. In 2016, the government had an estimated 106,469 such targets. What's more, it's essentially unarguable that such surveillance will suck up a lot of data about U.S. citizens. The government calls this seizure of personal information incidental. But incidental does not mean that it was accidental or inadvertent. It was neither accidental nor inadvertent. All incidental means in this case is that it is not supposedly the main target of the surveillance. Okay, now here's where it gets extra good. The FBI has that authority to query that data. That is all this data that the NSA has sucked up, which says is incidental and it doesn't look at because it's just filed away, but it has it. The FBI can query that data. In 2016, David Medine, who at the time was chair of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, told the Senate Judiciary Committee that the FBI made such queries routinely, even at the assessment stage, that is, before any actual investigation has begun. The assessment stage is when the FBI is trying to see if, is there something there that's even worth investigating. Medine described the agency as being, quote, sort of entitled to poke around and see if there's something there. In other words, they were sort of entitled to go on fishing expeditions. Amy Jeffress, who served as an impartial advisor to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, said that court described such queries as routine and encouraged, and she added that, quote, there is no requirement that the matter be a serious one, nor that it have any relation to national security. Put more directly, through Section 702, the FBI can and does engage in warrantless searches of warrantlessly gathered information, and they do it without any requirement of even a suspicion of wrongdoing. And before anyone tries to jump in and to say that, oh no, the NSA acted with a warrant issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, that warrant would refer to gathering information about the target of the surveillance, which means that all the incidental data on Americans, the very data that the FBI is querying, was gathered without a warrant. And even if the FBI misses something, there's a backup. The NSA can share with the FBI or any other law enforcement agency any data which it reasonably believes to contain evidence of a crime. Now, in fairness, there isn't a lot of evidence that the FBI has been using this option to pursue cases that do not involve foreign intelligence information. But leaving aside the troubling implication that as soon as the words foreign intelligence and national security are invoked, constitutional rights are supposed to go out the window, the equally troubling fact is that if the FBI was milking the NSA's database to pursue domestic crimes, we might never know. You see, the thing is, there's a practice called parallel construction. That's what it's called. And it involves taking information gained either through one of these warrantless searches or by a tip from the NSA and using it to create a separate investigation, using the information you got to find out what you in fact already knew, or even just to create a different investigatory trail, dating the start of the investigation as sometime after this tip or this search, but not because of it. And in either case, just pretending to judges, to juries, to defense counsel, to everybody that the NSA database had nothing to do with it. In short, lying about it. Here's the bottom line. Even if you want to insist that no one has actually done anything wrong here, that the fears have thus far been overblown, which again, there's no way to really know. But even if you want to insist that, even if you're prepared to insist that, are you prepared to guarantee that for all of the future years, for all of the future FBI directors and agents, for all of the future NSA directors and spooks, for all of the future national security councils, for all the future administrations, for all the future White Houses, are you prepared to to guarantee that all of them will be equally scrupulous? Because if you say that Section 702 should be permanent, that's what you are saying. You are saying that everybody in the future can be trusted. Section 702 should be stopped. It should be allowed to die. I say again what I said last week. If your representatives in Congress won't agree at minimum to actively oppose making 702 permanent, if they won't even go that far, they do not deserve to be in Congress. They do not deserve to wear the mantle of a representative of a free people. And let's take a break. And we are back. And we are back with another one of our occasional features. This one's called For the Record. And this is where we go through some things relatively quickly just to make sure that they get mentioned, even if we're not going to spend or can't spend a whole lot of time on them. So this is For the Record. On June 12th, Donald the Rump had his first full cabinet meeting. It started with his high orangeness praising himself and all the great things he's supposedly done. And then it went around the room with everybody introducing themselves, which is entirely reasonable, and then going on about how gloriously it was just so double fudge sundae with marshmallow and a cherry on top treat, how great it was to be working for Donald J. the Rump. It started with Mike Pence saying it was the greatest privilege of his life to be the Rump's coat holder, and proceeding through Chief of Staff Reince Priebus thanking the Rump for the opportunity and blessing to serve your agenda. And all the while, his orangeness sat there soaking it all up, totally and completely pleased with himself and smiling and nodding approvingly. Chris Cillizza of CNN called it the weirdest cabinet meeting ever. New York Times reporter Julie Davis said on Twitter, "Never have seen a cabinet meeting photo op quite like that one," an opinion echoed by CNN's Jake Tapper, and TheWeek.com called it bizarre. The presidency of Donald the Rump increasingly looks less like a presidency and more like a personality cult, which is probably why he gets along with dictators so well. All right, next up, For the Record. In May, in that 1 month, 3 15-year-old unarmed black boys were killed by police in separate incidents in California, Connecticut, and Texas. In at least 2 of those cases, the initial police accounts of those incidents proved to be complete, total lies. Overall, as of June 14th, at least 548 people have been killed by police in the U.S. in 2017. Right, For the Record, last fall, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services put in place a rule under which nursing homes that receive federal funding, which essentially is just about all of them, could not include so-called mandatory arbitration clauses in their contracts. In other words, residents and their family members are given back the right to sue. Now, under new management, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have unleashed a proposed rule that would rescind the earlier rule and again make forced arbitration, a method which almost never works to the benefit of consumers, would make that again the industry standard. Now, I have recently referred to how the U.S. is adopting militarism as national policy, including quoting the Rump statement, "We have given them," that is the military, "total authorization." And I also noted the push for a major shift in a major escalation strategy in Afghanistan. So now, For the Record, on June 14th, Reuters reported that the Rump had given Defense Secretary Jim Mattis his authority. That is, Mattis has the authority now to set troop levels in Afghanistan, opening the door to a new surge, maybe we could call it a resurgent surge, in U.S. troops in Afghanistan. All right, next, something else. You undoubtedly have heard about this, about the gunman who shot up a group of Republican lawmakers who were practicing for a annual charity baseball game. Among the people shot was House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, who is, at last report, still in critical condition, and at least 4 others were wounded before the shooter was killed. You've also undoubtedly heard about how the shooter, one James Hodgkinson, was some real liberal and a Bernie Sanders supporters. So I want this noted. For the record, I predict that you will not find one single gopper, one single wingnut, one single person on the entire right half of the American political spectrum who will describe this guy as what they always describe right-wing shooters as, a lone wacko. And instead, they will claim that he is emblematic of the violence of the left. and they will do it because they have no conscience. Right, for the record, 2 top Michigan health officials have been criminally charged for their role in the Flint water crisis. The state's chief medical executive, Eden Wells, was charged with obstruction of justice and lying to police. And State Health and Human Services Director Nick Lyon has been charged with involuntary manslaughter. 12 people died of Legionnaire's disease as a result of the decision made by the unelected emergency manager of Flint, appointed by Governor Rick Snidely Whiplash, to switch the water supply from Detroit to the Flint River in April 2014. By the way, the water in Flint is still not fit to drink. All right, finally, just this is really about on a personal note. I grew up in New Jersey, and in a lot of ways, it still feels like home. So it is with genuine personal satisfaction that I can report that, for the record, according to the latest Quinnipiac University poll, Governor Chris Christie has the lowest approval rating of any New Jersey governor in the 20-year history of the poll. 81% disapprove of the job Christie is doing. All right, now moving on from there to one of our regular features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. We had 2 main contenders this week. First up is Missouri State Representative Mike Moon, who, if I slip and call him Mike Loon, don't be surprised. On Monday of this week, Republican Governor Eric Greitens, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Eric Greitens called the Missouri legislature into a special session to discuss reformulated restrictions on abortion providers after federal courts had struck down portions of the state's law. In response, Moon announced the Missouri Right to Life Act, a bill that he's filed that would, quote, require the due process of law before the life of any human, born or unborn, is ended prior to natural death, which would effectively, of course, ban all abortions in the state. The thing is, he made this announcement by posting footage of himself beheading and gutting a chicken as he made the announcement, including declaring we need to get to the heart of the matter here, as he pulled out the chicken's heart and presented it to the camera. Which is really high-quality clownishness, and most weeks would win the prize, but unfortunately this week the competition was too stiff for him. But in fairness to him, he was beaten out by an old pro at nutbaggery. So this week, the big red nose goes to Representative Dana Rohrabacher. On June 7th, gunmen and suicide bombers attacked Iran's parliament and the shrine of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, located just outside the capital, Tehran. At least 17 were killed and dozens wounded, leading to an hours-long siege at the legislature before 4 of the attackers were killed. ISIS has claimed authorship of the attacks, marking the first time that this group of Sunni extremists has taken responsibility for an attack in Shiite-majority Iran. All right, what does that have to do with Dana Rohrabacher? At a House Foreign Affairs Committee about Hezbollah the day after the attacks, Rohrabacher said the attack in Iran could be a good thing and actually proposed the U.S. government support ISIS in attacking other groups. And no, I am not exaggerating, not one bit. Quote, "Isn't it a good thing for us to have the United States finally backing up Sunnis who will attack Hezbollah and the Shiite threat to us? Isn't that a good thing?" And if that wasn't enough, he even suggested that the attack was the result of some secret foreign policy scheme of the rump, saying that maybe the attack rose from, quote, a Trump strategy of actually supporting one group against another. To use a great old phrase, cap the climax, Rohrabacher later issued a statement clarifying his position, in which, until it was corrected, as a clarification of the clarification, I expect you could call that. Until it was corrected, that statement assumed that Ayatollah Khomeini is still alive. He died in 1989. Dana Rohrabacher. What a clown. By the way, as a quick footnote to this, the Trump administration statement responding to the terror attack included the statement that states that sponsor terrorism risk falling victim to the evil they promote. Frankly, I wish that we had thought of that before 9/11. All right, last for this week, our other regular feature. This is the outrage of the week. All right, here's some news for you. About 2 weeks ago, Illinois passed a bill, which Governor Bruce Rauner has said that he will sign, to ban the use of so-called gay panic and trans panic as defenses against charges involving physical violence, such as assault or even worse. The idea behind these defenses is that for the defendant, it was so shocking, so utterly horrifying to discover that the person they were dealing with, or in the case of trans panic, maybe even had sex with, discovering that person is gay or transgender, that is so horrifying that the accused just lost control of themselves. They were traumatized and they panicked to a point that they could not be held responsible for their actions. Now Illinois is banning the use of that as a defense. So why is it here under the outrage of the week instead of under good news? Because Illinois is only the second state, California being the other, to have done so. In 48 states, gay panic and trans panic are still legal defenses. In 48 states, it is legal to use a victim's gender or sexual identity to justify violence against them, even murder. In 48 states, it is legal to plead, in effect, not guilty by reason of the fact that the victim was gay or transgender. Now, that doesn't mean these defenses always succeed. In fact, the majority of cases they don't. But they remain legal, despite the fact that the American Bar Association recommended that their use be banned 4 years ago. And worse, the handful of other places that have tried to ban these defenses, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the District of Columbia, have failed to get their legislation passed. Pennsylvania Representative Michael Schlossberg, who sponsored the bill in Pennsylvania, summed it up well. How in God's name, he said, could panic defenses be real in the 21st century? Yes, we have come far on issues of gender and sexual identity, farther than I could have imagined just 10 years ago. But that doesn't change the fact that too much of our legal structure still has to be dragged kicking and screaming out of the prejudices of decades gone by. And that is an outrage. That's it for this week. There is something I am definitely going to talk about next week. It happened too late for me to get it in the show this week. The Senate just failed to block the sale of $500 million in precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia, weapons which will be used very likely to target civilians in its ongoing war in Yemen, which has led to famine and death. And I am going to be talking about U.S. complicity in war crimes next week. But for now, you can look forward to that. And in the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And as always, peace.